Ahora. Buenos días a todos y a todos. Voy a hablar en inglés. It's a great honor to be here, and it's been such an exciting conference. And I thought I would start off maybe a little bit more on the philosophical note before going into some details. But you know that UNESCO, the UN Agency for Education, Science and Culture, Communications, we were set up after the Second World War. And the idea was that people had done very terrible things to each other during that period. And the belief was that we needed to spend more time listening to each other. And we used the phrase at UNESCO to build peace in the minds of men and women. But now we find ourselves in 2023, and it seems that we're having a fight with the planet. It seems first we were having a fight with each other, and then we decided we were going to have a fight with the planet. And it kind of comes from a momentum around colonialism, around many different trends in our history. But at this conference, I think what you're seeing is a very important dialogue. Is different people from different countries with different functions getting together to try to see how can we work together to make that reconciliation so that there's not only peaceful relations between humans, but peaceful relations between species and relations with the land and the waters of the planet. And I think that's very much what I learned from indigenous people. I went to university, like some of you here, but my real education was in the bush, in the Kalahari Desert and in the Sahara, in the Congo Basin, sitting by the fire or out trekking in the bush. That's where I began to learn more about the world. So I thought I would share a little bit about our work. UNESCO is unusual organization because it has a very big mandate. It covers many different areas, but also it's seen itself as the convener of diverse voices and diverse ideas and working across the entire planet, and particularly looking for peace and reconciliation between North and South and East and West. And so indigenous peoples have featured prominently in the work for generations at UNESCO. And in 2017, we adopted a formal policy on our programming to align it with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We're also the only UN entity that has conserved areas. So we are the host of the 1972 Convention on the Conservation of Cultural and Natural World Heritage. We also have the Man and Biosphere program that just celebrated its 50th anniversary. And the newest one is the UNESCO Geoparks mechanism. And I think very fundamental is also that for UNESCO, we see nature and culture as parts of the same process. So we also have the 2003 Convention on the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage. And I think it's something that I wanted to bring forward a little more strongly here around the relationship between biological diversity and cultural diversity. For those who know a bit about my background, I'm by training both a political scientist and a sociolinguist, but it was when I got really more involved in biodiversity conservation that I began to get deeper into this understanding that there is a correlation between biological diversity on the planet and linguistic and cultural diversity. And it's not an accident. There's some correlation. There's some way in which humans create niches within systems. This has been greatly elaborated by Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Economics Prize in examining how people create social systems to sustain the environment that they're living in. How do they equitably run and manage natural resources? And I think in our work, when I was talking about building peace in the minds of men and women, we would like to put back into the center of this discussion, climate change did not happen by itself. It was a product of our mind as humans. Biological diversity is not being destroyed by nature, it's being destroyed by something inside of us. It's how we think, it's how we behave. And so engaging in this interface of biological and cultural diversity, it reawakens for us that the transformation is in our culture, the transformation's in how we relate to each other in the world. Let's see where that's going to take us. We've been working in all parts of the planet, having dialogue with indigenous peoples, local communities, scientists, and policymakers. And this came out of a workshop in the Caribbean. We work a lot in around the greater Caribbean basin. But I'll just summarize it in a very short way, because you have some very important people that you're about to listen to. But this has to be about respect. It has to be about saying that what happened in our history that made one group powerful and another group not powerful, that is not going to help us move forward. We need to have an equity of listening and understanding that those who are the custodians and the protectors of nature, however vulnerable they may find themselves in at this moment, they have a lot to tell us about how to work our way forward. And we need to understand the value of these different types of diversity and build partnerships. But also one of the most important interfaces, and this conference is exploring this, is around the way that scientists and indigenous people respect and work together. The way conservationists should be the biggest ally of indigenous people. 20 years ago, you didn't hear a lot about that, but the IUCN and other agencies have started to transform that relationship. That's critical. But was the money there? Were the donors there? Were the investment there? And this is what this Congress is able to raise with us. My specialization is on the interface between oral knowledge systems that are held in languages, some of the 7,000 languages on Earth, all of which have their own taxonomies, all of which can tell you about desert winds, plant behavior, how jungles function, how the ocean works, people who crossed backwards and forwards across the Pacific without any technology other than indigenous knowledge. There's a massive, most of what we know about the world is not in English, and it's not in Spanish, and it's not in French. It's in those other 7,000 languages which are narrowly niched to their environment and can help us understand the world. Our other goal is around the normative and standard system. We're the United Nations, so we work right at grassroots level, but we're also trying to see how does all of this conversation feed into the SDGs? How does it feed into changing science and creating international norms and standards? And already, as you know, in 2007, the whole of the UN, in all of its diversity, agreed to a declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples, which gave particular attention to the governance and conservation of natural resources in relationship with indigenous cultures. Then the big breakthrough, when we were really at our limit of thinking maybe the multilateral system cannot protect us, suddenly we get the Paris Agreement. And in the Paris Agreement, and I think it's historic and important, the leaders of the world said we must work with indigenous people. It's the only way forward. That relationship of climate and biodiversity, of stewardship and of knowledge, and that's built into the Paris Agreement. But we've just had another landmark moment, and you can say that these are words, but they also mark a change in our thinking, the change in our minds. So we've seen a dramatic set of results come out of the new global biodiversity framework. And we're inviting you to understand that document, which highlights the rights and the roles of indigenous peoples, but also how we have to bring the human community together to deliver this together. And UNESCO, along with the IUCN and the Secretary of the CBD, are leading a process on the joint program of work on the relationships of biological and cultural diversity. One of the programs that we're doing, I'm just touching very lightly on it, is we are the technical support unit. My unit is a technical support unit to the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. IPBES is gathering all the world knowledge to provide relevant information for decision-making about the environment, water, lands, soils, each piece of the puzzle. And every one of those assessments includes indigenous peoples who are active knowledge builders. But now we're doing it at national level, and I invite all of you to go and look at the new Colombian National Ecosystem Assessment, which has just been produced and released, the first national framework that includes indigenous authors and indigenous knowledge holders working with national scientists and policymakers. So we're doing this work around the world. We're working with Thailand at the moment on their first marine ecosystem assessment, Dominican Republic, Grenada, Malawi, Botswana, and other countries. So this is being put into practice. Now, I was at a meeting around talking about a global water assessment new mechanism, and the scientists turned to me and said, Nigel, there have to be indigenous people involved. It's the state of the art now. So whether you're talking about environmental sciences or water or technical work, this cooperation has now become key for our work. And I keep coming back to the idea that knowledge is transmitted in many, many ways. And there was a conversation yesterday about it's easy to talk about indigenous knowledge, but it's actually about a deeper conversation. It's about values. It's around how humans relate to each other and to the world. And so I think in our work, we're actually talking about a real exchange. We're not talking about telling rural communities what to do. We're actually going there as students to listen. And here were just some examples that came out of some of the work in Belize on the different ways in which people know things. We talk often very generally about indigenous knowledge, but indigenous knowledge is highly technical, and it really requires somebody with a strong science background to fully understand. And I can tell you many stories about that. Forecasting capacity. Almost all indigenous peoples I've worked with have the capacity to do weather forecasting and climate analysis. People have been watching the climate change for 40 years. They've been telling us it's happening, and we are not working with them in creating national platforms for adaptation. Every indigenous person who wakes up in the morning is doing climate adaptation. They don't call it that, but they have to do it. They're on the front line. So why would those people not be at the center of national decision-making around how to do good adaptation? But at the end of all of this, there is a gap. The people who have this frontline knowledge are also in most cases living with very little money or even in poverty. And yet we have a global system where there is a great deal of wealth. So how are we bringing those pieces together? What is a just finance system? But also, I think it's come up. I think we're going to hear more about it. But I want to emphasize this is not charity. It is not going to help some poor people in a rural area. It's we who need saving. It's the planet that needs our attention. So we go there in a sense of humility to listen. And if we can move some of that wealth is like a type of energy, like any other energy. And we're going to move it to where it needs to be so that we can get the solutions for everyone. And I think this conference is just a very exciting space in which conversations are happening that we don't hear very often. I think I'm going to wind up on that. Let's just stop there. Okay. So let me conclude. Indigenous knowledge is highly sophisticated. There are thousands of these systems in each ecosystem around the planet. I can tell you about what goes on in the Pacific Islands. I can tell you what's happening in Central Africa. But you're sitting right here in Latin America, one of the richest regions of the world, where you have hundreds and hundreds of these taxonomical systems, knowledge systems, value systems, and you have the capacity to bring really key holders of responsibility together to create something new, which is the definition of our pathway forward. And I'm going to stop with that. I do want to thank RedLAC for the invitation, to Prof. Nampe, who's just been fantastic with all the logistics, but also my UNESCO colleagues at the Lima office who believed in this process, and they've brought some extraordinary people that you're going to listen to now. And we thank the government of Peru, who's played a leadership role globally on climate change, invited us here, and of course the city of Cusco who have welcomed us. So I'm going to hand over the floor to some much more interesting people, and wishing you a good end to the Congress. So thank you very much for that.